Hello and welcome back to another evening together. Get yourself settled in, get comfortable, and let's talk about Dexter. Now, tonight's video is a little different from the ones we've done before. We're not going through plot holes, we're not cataloging bad decisions, and we're not doing a scene-by-scene breakdown of any particular season. Tonight I want to talk about something I've been turning over in my head for a while now, something that I think gets at why Dexter works so well when it works, and why the question of what it's actually about is more interesting than it first appears. So here's the thing, most serial killer shows, when you strip them back to the bones, are asking you to be frightened, or disgusted, or impressed by the detective who catches a monster. The genre has a fairly well-worn set of emotional beats, and they work. And there's nothing wrong with them, but they're recognizable. You know which feeling you're being pointed toward. Dexter is not doing that. Or at least it's not only doing that. From the very first voiceover, and from the very first line, really, the show is asking you to understand Dexter Morgan. Not to root for him exactly, though that happens too, but to understand him. To be let in, to see the world through his eyes, and find it, if not comfortable, then at least comprehensible. That's a more unusual invitation than it sounds. And what I've always found fascinating about that invitation is that it has a philosophical quality to it. There's something in the voiceover, in the code, in Dexter's specific brand of self-awareness that makes the show feel like it's in conversation with ideas. Real ideas, not in a showy, name-dropping way. The show never once mentions the word philosophy, but in the way the best fiction sometimes does, by putting a character in situations that force genuinely interesting questions and then not blinking. The question I want to think through tonight is this: what would Friedrich Nietzsche make of Dexter Morgan? I know, bear with me. Nietzsche was a 19th century German philosopher who spent a significant portion of his career thinking about a very specific type of person, someone who has moved outside conventional morality, who operates by their own rules, who appears from the outside to have achieved something like genuine freedom from the values everyone else inherited without questioning, and who does all of this not out of rebellion or nihilism, but because they've done the hard work of looking honestly at who they are and what they actually believe. The show presents Dexter as exactly that kind of person. The code, the self-awareness, the deliberate life he's constructed around his nature, all of it has the aesthetic of philosophical self-mastery. He's not a monster who got lucky. He's a man who looked at what he was and built something around it. And Nietzsche, I think, would find that deeply interesting, and then deeply troubling, and then possibly not particularly surprising. That's what tonight is about. We're going to go through the show, from the pilot right through to New Blood, and look at what Dexter's life actually consists of, philosophically speaking. What the code really is, what the dark passenger actually means, what the people around him reveal about the cost of his self-construction, and what the audience's sustained, devoted, bring him back from cancellation, twice love for this man tells us about what Nietzsche was actually warning us about. If you enjoy what we do here and you haven't subscribed yet, now is a lovely time. It genuinely helps, and it means you'll be notified when the next one goes up, which, given the direction these conversations have been going, is probably going to end up being about Harrison. Right, let's get into it. Let me start with the pilot, because the pilot is doing something very specific and it's worth paying attention to. The first image we get of Dexter Morgan is him watching a real man driving a real car in the real world, with a name and a job and presumably people who care about him. Dexter is observing him the way a naturalist might observe an animal. With complete attention, no visible emotion, total patience. And then the voiceover begins. My name is Dexter, Dexter Morgan. I don't know what made me the way I am, but whatever it was left a hollow place inside. People fake a lot of human interactions, but I feel like I fake them all, and I fake them very well. Now, the first thing to notice about that voiceover is what it isn't doing. It isn't asking for sympathy. It isn't performing distress. It's not the voice of a man who is tortured by his condition, who wishes he were different, who is fighting some internal battle and losing. It's calm, it's precise, it's almost clinical. Dexter knows what he is, says what he is, and seems entirely settled in the saying of it. That quality, the self-possession, the clarity, is the thing that sets Dexter apart from almost every other fictional monster you've ever encountered. He's not in denial. He's not performing sanity for the benefit of the camera. He is, in his own self-assessment, exactly what he appears to be. And he has decided to be honest about it, at least in his own internal narration, even if the rest of his life is an elaborate performance. And that honesty, that specific quality of unsentimental self-knowledge, is what gives the show its philosophical texture. Because honesty about your own nature, real, unflinching, undefensive honesty, is actually one of the central things Nietzsche admired and thought was extraordinarily rare. Most people, in his view, spend the majority of their lives avoiding an accurate picture of who they are. Because an accurate picture is uncomfortable and self-deception is cheap and easy and everyone around you is doing it. Dexter appears, at least on the surface, to have opted out of this. He knows what he is. He doesn't apologize for it. He's built his life around it. The opening credits reinforce this. There's that sequence, the mundane morning routine, made sinister by the framing, the orange being sliced, the coffee dripping, the egg being cooked, the button being done up, a shoelace being tied. Everything normal, everything ordinary. And yet somehow unsettling because the framing keeps catching you on small details that suggest predation. The way the knife cuts, the way the wire garrots, the way the meat is handled. It's a brilliant piece of visual work, and what it's saying is, this is a normal life and a predator's life occupying exactly the same body, simultaneously, indistinguishably. That image, the predator hiding in plain sight inside the normal life, is what the show spends 8 seasons exploring. And the key question it keeps asking in different ways across all those seasons is, are these two things genuinely coexisting? Or is one of them the real Dexter and the other a performance? And if it's a performance, which performance is which? Now, where Nietzsche comes in is this. He had a specific term for the person who has genuinely moved outside conventional morality, examined it honestly, rejected what doesn't hold up, and built a genuine value system of their own. He called this person the Ubermensch, which people translate as overman or superman. Neither of which is quite right, and both of which sound a bit much. The better translation, I think, is simply the person who has overcome. Overcome what, specifically? Overcome the need to inherit their values from outside themselves. Overcome the pressure to accept the moral framework handed to them by their parents, their religion, their society, without examining it. The Ubermensch, as Nietzsche described him, is not a tyrant or a brute. He is not someone who has decided that strength makes right and gone out to dominate people. He is someone who has done the genuine philosophical work of looking at themselves honestly, understanding their own nature completely, and then constructing values that emerge from that understanding, not borrowed values, not values designed to make other people comfortable, values that are genuinely, authentically, irreducibly their own. Dexter looks, from a distance, like that person. The code, the self-awareness, the deliberate life, the calm acceptance of his own nature, all of it points in that direction. And I think that's a significant part of why the show works the way it works, and why audiences responded to it the way they did. On some level, watching Dexter, we're watching the fantasy of genuine freedom from conventional morality. The fantasy of someone who has actually done it, who has looked at the rules everyone else follows and said, I've examined those and they're not mine and I'm building something else. That fantasy is seductive. It's been seductive for a long time, and Nietzsche, who spent his career thinking about exactly this fantasy, would have had some very specific things to say about what Dexter Morgan actually is, as opposed to what he appears to be. The gap between those two things is, I think, the most interesting thing about the show, and I want to pause here for a second on the voiceover specifically because I think it's doing something more interesting than it's usually given credit for. The voiceover is Dexter's internal narration, his thoughts, his assessments, his running commentary on the world as he moves through it. It's the most direct access we get to who he is, and the show treats it as authoritative. When Dexter says he feels nothing, the show, for long stretches, seems to accept that at face value. But the voiceover is itself a performance. Not in the sense that Dexter is consciously lying to us, I don't think that's what's happening, but in the sense that the story we tell ourselves about who we are is never fully reliable, even when we mean it sincerely. Especially when we mean it sincerely. Dexter has been telling himself the hollow place story for so long that it has the quality of settled fact. He doesn't examine it. He doesn't interrogate it. It is the foundation he builds everything else on. I am not like other people. I do not feel what they feel. The performance is all there is underneath. And yet the show keeps undercutting it. Not in big dramatic moments, not usually, but in small persistent ones. The way he talks about Deborah, the specific quality of his grief in season 5, the look on his face when Harrison is born. These are not the reactions of a man with a hollow place inside. They are the reactions of a man who has told himself the hollow place story so many times that he doesn't notice when it stops being true. Nietzsche thought that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are have enormous power, specifically enormous power to constrain us. If you have decided that you are a certain kind of person, you will find ways to be that kind of person even when the evidence is pointing elsewhere. Not out of dishonesty, but out of the deep human need for a coherent self-narrative. Dexter's self-narrative is, I am a predator wearing a human mask, and the humanity is performance. That narrative is so settled, so built in, that when genuine human feeling emerges, and it does repeatedly, he doesn't register it as a challenge to the narrative. He registers it as noise. The gap between the two things and the story Dexter tells about himself and the person the show keeps showing us is the first place where the philosophical question lives, before the code, before the dark passenger, before any of the specific structures of his life. The question is simply, does this man know who he is? And the answer, if you look carefully, is not quite, not fully. There are rooms in the house he hasn't opened. Here's where things start to get complicated. Dexter's apparent self-knowledge comes with a set of very specific conditions attached, and once you look at those conditions carefully, the picture starts to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, in the way that things become clear when you examine them under better light. So let's do that. Let's look at where Dexter's values actually came from, because that's where the philosophical story really starts. Before we go any further into Dexter's specific failures, and there are several, I want to spend a little time with Nietzsche himself because he gets misrepresented constantly, and I'd rather we have the accurate version in our heads before we start applying him to anything. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 in what is now Germany. He died in 1900, which means he never lived to see the 20th century turn his ideas into whatever the 20th century turned them into. And I think he would have found the whole business exhausting. He was a philosopher, a classical philologist, a writer of extraordinary prose, and by the end of his life, a man in the grip of severe mental illness, the exact cause of which is still debated. He produced most of his important work in a roughly 10-year window between 1878 and 1888, and then he collapsed and the work stopped. He spent his final decade essentially silent. What he hated above almost everything else was mediocrity, not in the crude sense of hating people who aren't talented. He had considerable compassion for ordinary life when it was honestly lived. What he hated was the specific kind of person who had stopped reaching, who had found a comfortable arrangement and called it living, who had inherited a set of values from their parents and their church and their society and had never once examined whether those values were genuinely theirs or just the values that had been handed to them by default. The person who had, as he put it, bred out of himself the capacity for genuine passion. He called this figure the last man, not as a compliment. The last man is the endpoint of a society that has decided comfort is the highest goal. He earns enough to stay warm. He has small entertainments. He doesn't take risks. He doesn't feel great passion or pursue great aims or sacrifice anything meaningful for anything he genuinely believes in. He lives the same day over and over and calls it a life. He blinks. Nietzsche actually describes the blinking, this specific small gesture that he uses as the physical expression of a mind that has stopped reaching. Now, the last man is one end of what Nietzsche was thinking about. The other end is the Ubermensch. And I want to be careful here because this concept gets flattened into something it isn't. The Ubermensch is not a superhero. He is not a dictator. He is not someone who has decided that the rules don't apply to him and gone about doing whatever he wants. That reading is a misreading, and it's been causing problems for a long time. The Ubermensch is someone who has done something specific and genuinely difficult. He has looked at the values he inherited from his parents, from his culture, from the accumulated weight of tradition, and he has examined them honestly. He has asked, are these actually mine? Do I believe these because I've thought them through or because I was told them before I was old enough to think? And then, from that honest examination, he has built something of his own, not a rejection of all values, which is nihilism, a trap Nietzsche thought was almost as bad as the last man, but a genuine, examined, chosen set of values that belong to him because he made them, not because he received them. The will to power, which is probably his most quoted and most misunderstood concept, is not about domination of other people. It's about self-overcoming. The drive to become more than you currently are. To push against whatever is resisting you, your fear, your laziness, your smallness, the version of yourself that wants to stay comfortable, and come out of that pushing as something more capable, more honest, more genuinely yourself. The enemy in Nietzsche's framework is not other people. The enemy is the smaller version of you, the version that would rather not bother. He also wrote about two types of morality that I want to briefly touch on because they're relevant to everything we're going to talk about with Dexter: master morality and slave morality. Master morality, in his description, is the morality of the strong. People who define what is good by looking at themselves and their own qualities. They look inward and say, this is what I am, and what I am is good. Strength, vitality, creativity, generosity. These are good because they are mine and I value them. Slave morality works the other way around. It starts not by defining good, but by defining evil. Pointing to the master, the powerful person, the one who oppresses me. And then good is defined as whatever the evil person is not. Humility is good because pride is evil. Patience is good because power is evil. It is, at its core, a reactive morality. It needs an enemy to define itself against. Nietzsche thought that modern Western culture was saturated in slave morality without knowing it. That most of what people called virtue was really a dressed-up version of resentment. The resentment of the weak toward the strong transformed into a moral framework that made weakness seem noble and strength seem suspect. There's one more concept worth mentioning before we go any further because it's central to everything we're going to look at. Nietzsche wrote about nihilism at length, the condition of a person or a whole culture that has quietly stopped believing anything has real meaning or value. He thought it was largely unavoidable in the modern world. The old value systems, mainly religious ones, had been undermined enough that the people who nominally believed in them often didn't. Not really, not when you got to the foundations. So you ended up with a culture going through the motions of values it had privately stopped trusting. His concern, the one that gave him the most trouble, wasn't active nihilism, the person who stares into the emptiness honestly and decides to build something of their own in response. That person he had some respect for, even if the process was painful and the outcome uncertain. The dangerous thing was passive nihilism, the person who glimpses the emptiness and immediately turns away from it toward whatever is nearest and most soothing, who doesn't build anything and doesn't destroy anything with purpose, who simply fills the space where meaning used to be with comfort and habit in the company of people who are also not looking at the thing, and who, if you ask them, would tell you they're doing fine. The passive nihilist doesn't look like a person in crisis. They look like a person going through the motions of a life. They have routines, relationships, things they do. They maintain their surface. They are, from a certain distance, indistinguishable from a person who has done the genuine philosophical work, and found genuine things to believe in. The difference is entirely interior, and the interior is the one place neither of them, neither the genuine person nor the passive nihilist, is fully willing to examine. Dexter is not a passive nihilist in the crude sense. He's too active, too deliberate, too committed to his routines for that framing to quite stick. But the question of whether his elaborate rituals of meaning, the code, the kill room, the blood slides, the voiceovers running commentary on purpose and identity, are genuine meaning construction or sophisticated comfort maintenance is one the show circles without fully answering. And this is where it starts to get specifically interesting for Dexter, because the show presents Dexter as someone who has moved beyond all of this, who operates with the clarity and self-possession of someone who has genuinely left conventional morality behind. But when you look at the actual structure of Dexter's life, where his values came from, who he's accountable to, what his code actually consists of, the picture that emerges is considerably more complicated than that, and considerably more Nietzschean in all the ways Nietzsche would not have meant as a compliment. Let's start with the most fundamental thing, the code of Harry. Harry Morgan was a Miami police officer, a good one by all available evidence, respected, experienced, committed to the job. He was also the man who found Dexter as a child, recognized what Dexter was, and instead of doing what almost any other adult would have done, getting the boy help, or at the very least telling someone, he decided to do something else. He decided to channel it. The code of Harry, as the show explains it, is built around two primary principles. First, Dexter can only kill people who are themselves killers, people who have committed murder and escaped the justice system. Second, Dexter must never get caught. Everything else flows from those two foundations: the elaborate rituals of the kill room, the blood slides, the way Dexter prepares and researches his targets. All of it is in service of those two rules, which Harry established during Dexter's childhood and adolescence, across years of deliberate training. And here's the thing about that. Harry's intentions were, as far as we can tell, good. He found a traumatized child with profound homicidal urges, and he tried to build something livable around it. He tried to give Dexter a life that didn't end in a cell or a laboratory. That's a genuine act of love, filtered through the perspective of a police officer who understood both what the law could and couldn't do, and what this particular child seemed to need. I don't think Harry was wrong to try. I think he was doing the best he could with something that had no good options. But here's the Nietzschean problem, and it's a significant one. These are not Dexter's values. They were never Dexter's values. He inherited them from a man who is, by the time the story begins, already dead. Dead of what we initially believed to be heart disease. Though the truth, as season 2 reveals, is considerably darker. Dexter lives by a dead man's rules, not rules he arrived at through genuine examination of his own nature. Not rules he chose. Rules that were constructed for him before he was old enough to choose anything, by a frightened father trying to manage something he loved but didn't understand. Nietzsche's entire project, in a sense, is the insistence that inherited values are not really values at all. They're habits. They're borrowed clothes. They might fit or they might not, but you'll never know until you take them off and look at yourself without them. And most people never do that because it's uncomfortable, and the clothes have been on so long they've started to feel like skin. The whole point of the Ubermensch is to do that uncomfortable thing, to take off the inherited clothes, look honestly at what's underneath, and then, and this is the crucial part, make something genuinely yours. Dexter never does this. The show, particularly in its later seasons, gestures toward it, but he never actually arrives. He carries the code like a family heirloom, respectfully, sometimes dutifully, sometimes with visible effort. But he never sits down and asks the question that would need to be asked. Is this actually what I believe? Not, is this what Harry told me? Not, is this the version of myself I can live with? But, is this mine? Season 8 adds a wrinkle that makes this even richer. Dr. Evelyn Vogel arrives and reveals that she helped Harry design the code. She's a neuropsychiatrist who specialized in psychopaths, and she and Harry worked together to construct the framework that Dexter has been living inside his entire adult life. So now there are two creators of Dexter's supposedly authentic value system, neither of whom is Dexter. His entire philosophical foundation is outsourced. He is the product, not the author. And then watch how he actually uses the code throughout the series. He bends it constantly. There's a pattern that runs from the early seasons right through to New Blood. Dexter will kill in ways the code technically doesn't sanction, or will delay following the code's logic because something else he wants takes precedence, or will interpret the rules loosely enough that they cover whatever he's decided to do anyway. In New Blood, he kills Logan, a police officer, a genuinely innocent man who is simply doing his job, in order to escape. Logan is not a killer. Logan does not fit the code. And Dexter kills him anyway because in the moment, the code is less important than survival. This is not the behavior of a man who genuinely believes in his own values. When you genuinely believe in something, when it's authentically yours, it holds under pressure. It doesn't dissolve the moment staying with it becomes expensive. The code is a convenience Dexter uses when it costs him nothing and sets aside when it costs him something, which tells you exactly how deep the belief actually goes. Slave morality, in Nietzsche's description, always traces back to an external authority. Religious people trace their values back to God. Conventional people trace them back to social consensus. This is what we do, this is what's normal, this is what everyone agrees is acceptable. Dexter traces his back to Harry. The code is slave morality wearing a kill apron. It looks transgressive on the surface. It involves murder, after all, which conventional morality has a fairly clear position on. But its psychological structure is identical to any other inherited framework. These are the rules I was given by a figure of authority I trusted, and so these are the rules I follow. There's nothing wrong with loving someone who gave you your values. Harry was a real figure of love in Dexter's life, and I don't think the show wants us to flatten that. But loving the person who gave you your values is different from having examined those values yourself and decided they're right. One is gratitude, the other is the thing Nietzsche was actually talking about. And Dexter never makes it from the first thing to the second. Season 3 is worth dwelling on here for a moment, because it's the season where the code gets its most explicit stress test, and where the result is illuminating in ways the show itself perhaps underplays. Miguel Prado is an assistant district attorney. He is also a man who lost a brother to crime that went unpunished, who carries genuine grief and genuine rage about it, and who, when he discovers what Dexter is, does not recoil. He wants in. He wants to be what Dexter is, to do what Dexter does, to have the code, to act on the same logic. He wants it genuinely. He's not manipulating, he's drawn in by the same thing the audience is drawn in by. The idea that operating outside conventional justice by your own examined rules is a kind of freedom. Dexter, for a while, lets him in. They develop something that reads convincingly as genuine friendship. Dexter begins to teach him the code, the rules, the rituals, the discipline of it. He extends the framework that Harry gave him outward to another person for the first time. And it falls apart completely. Miguel, it turns out, has his own agenda, his own resentments, his own list of people he wants dead that has nothing to do with justice. He is using the code as a license, not as a genuine constraint. The code for Miguel is whatever he needs it to be in order to do what he was already going to do. Now, here's the interesting thing. Dexter's response to this is to kill Miguel, to apply the code to the man who was misusing the code, which is, on a surface level, the code working. Bad person, consequences, but it's also, if you think about it, the show demonstrating that the code is not a transferable value system. It is not a genuine philosophical framework that can be taught to another person and held independently by them. It is a personal arrangement, specific to Dexter, specific to his relationship with Harry, specific to the particular shape of his history. It doesn't generalize. Genuine values generalize. That's one of the things that distinguishes them from personal convenience. If the code were a real moral framework built from genuine examined principles, it would be something you could explain to someone and they would either accept or reject on the merits. What Miguel's arc shows is that the code can't survive being explained to someone who doesn't already have the specific emotional investment in Harry that Dexter has. It collapses under the weight of anyone else's reality, which tells you something about how much of it is principle and how much is fidelity. Now, one might say, but the dark passenger. Surely the dark passenger is Dexter's own, independent of Harry, something that belongs to him regardless of the code. And that's true. But the dark passenger, as a concept, as the way Dexter relates to his own nature, is actually the most philosophically revealing thing about him, and not in a good way. Let's look at that next. There's a line in season 7 of Dexter that I think about more than almost any other line in the show. It's delivered quietly, without particular dramatic emphasis, during one of the internal monologues that run throughout the series. Dexter is working through the question of whether his urge to kill is really a separate thing, this dark passenger he's been naming and navigating for his entire adult life, or whether it is, more simply and more terrifyingly, just him. He says, if there's no dark passenger, then I'm responsible for everything I've done. And that sentence is, I think, the most philosophically precise thing the show ever produced. It identifies exactly what the dark passenger is for, not what it is, but what it does. And what it does is provide an alibi. It is the mechanism by which Dexter can have a monster's nature while maintaining the story that the monster is not quite him. Not Dexter himself exactly, but something he carries. A passenger, a dark thing that hitched a ride somewhere in his childhood and has been insisting on the wheel ever since. It's his, but it isn't him. He is responsible for managing it, but not for having it. Before we go further, it's worth mentioning that the show itself addresses this directly and more honestly than you might expect. In a flashback during the same season, Harry, appearing as one of Dexter's internal projections, as he does throughout the show, tells him explicitly, "The dark passenger was all yours. I gave you the code. The dark passenger was your invention." Harry then says, "I meant you were traumatized, Dexter, not possessed." Think about that for a second. Dexter invented the concept of the dark passenger at around age 12, and Harry just let it go. He couldn't bring himself to push a 12-year-old to confront the full implication of his own nature, which is understandable. But by letting it go, he let Dexter build his entire psychological architecture around a fiction. A fiction that is, by season 7, so embedded that dismantling it would require Dexter to claim full authorship of every kill he's ever made. And here is where Nietzsche's concept of amor fati becomes essential. Amor fati, love of fate. It's a Latin phrase Nietzsche used to describe what he considered the highest possible relationship a person can have with their own existence. Not acceptance of fate, not tolerance of fate. Love. The complete, unconditional ownership of everything you are and everything you've done, and everything that has happened to you, such that if you were offered the chance to change any of it, you wouldn't. Because all of it is you, all of it is yours, all of it is, in some fundamental sense, what you chose, or at least what you are willing to own as if you had chosen. The person who achieves amor fati doesn't need a dark passenger. They don't need a separate entity to carry their darkest drives on their behalf. They look at those drives honestly and completely, and they say, "This is me. I do this, not the passenger, not the trauma, not the shipping container and what happened in it, me." From a place of complete ownership, they then have the genuine freedom to ask, given that this is who I am, what do I actually want to do about it? What values do I actually hold? What kind of life am I actually going to build? Dexter can never reach this question because he can never get through the one before it. He can never fully own his nature, and the reason, the specific, identifiable reason, is that the complete ownership of his nature would make him responsible for everything, every person he has killed, every person who has been damaged by proximity to what he is. Every choice, every act, every consequence. The weight of that is enormous. The dark passenger makes it manageable. It distributes the authorship. It says, not just me, but also this other thing. There's a comparison worth making here. Religious moral frameworks, particularly the ones Nietzsche spent a lot of time critiquing, often function in a similar way. The concept of sin as something that comes from outside, something that tempts or infects or possesses, serves the same function as the dark passenger. It allows people to participate in behavior they can't fully own because the agency is distributed between the self and an external force. Nietzsche's objection to this wasn't primarily theological, it was psychological. He thought it was a way of avoiding the hardest thing, complete, unconditional ownership of who you are. Dexter, who appears to have left conventional morality entirely behind, who seems to operate from a place of genuine self-knowledge and freedom, is doing exactly the same thing, just with a different vocabulary. Instead of, the devil made me do it, it's, the dark passenger made me do it. The form is different. The psychological function is identical. And what makes this genuinely tragic, rather than just philosophically interesting, is that the show keeps showing us what genuine ownership might look like. Lumen Pierce, in season 5, is a woman who wanted people dead. She didn't have a dark passenger. She had a desire for revenge, born from specific and devastating harm done to her by specific and real people. She owned it completely. She said, I want this, and I know why I want it, and I am responsible for wanting it. That's all it was. When it was done, and the people responsible were dead, the desire was gone, because it was never anything more than hers. Clear-eyed, owned, and finite. Dexter watched her do this and couldn't make the connection. He kept insisting that his version was different, that the passenger was something more fundamental, something that couldn't be resolved by satisfying it, something that would always come back. And maybe that's true, but it doesn't change what the passenger is doing for him psychologically. It doesn't change the alibi. The most uncomfortable reading of the dark passenger, and I think it's the right one, is this. Dexter doesn't claim full ownership of his nature because full ownership would require him to examine whether the life he's built around it is genuinely good or just genuinely convenient. And that examination, if done honestly, might produce an answer he isn't ready for. The dark passenger keeps that question at arm's length, and the Code of Harry gives him a framework that feels like morality without requiring the examination. It is, in other words, a very sophisticated form of avoiding the exact thing Nietzsche thought was most important. And there's something quietly telling about the name itself. Passenger, not driver, not engine, not navigator. Passenger, the word is doing real work. A passenger is subordinate, dependent, being carried. A passenger has no agency over the journey. The choice of that specific word at age 12 is Dexter instinctively reaching for the most distancing possible framing. Not this is a force in me, but this is a force riding in me. A distinction that sounds small and does enormous psychological work over a lifetime. That said, even Harry, the man who built the code, who named the passenger, who gave Dexter everything he uses to understand himself, even Harry couldn't sustain it. And what happened to Harry when the theory met the practice is one of the most significant things in the show's entire run. The reveal in season 2 that Harry Morgan did not die of heart disease. He died by suicide, which the show buries in a conversation between Dexter and Matthews so quietly that you could almost miss it. And then, once you've heard it, you can't unhear it in anything that came before. This is one of those moments in a long-running show where a single piece of information, delivered quietly and almost without drama, completely reframes everything you've seen before it. Matthews tells Dexter the truth. Harry overdosed on his heart medication. It was not accidental, and the reason, the specific trigger that led to it, is not left ambiguous. 3 days before his death, Harry walked in on a young Dexter happily dismembering a corpse. Not distressed, not conflicted, pleased with himself, hoping, as Dexter recalls it, for Harry's approval. Harry looked at what he had made. He said, "Stay away." And then he went home and died. There's something worth sitting with here. Harry had spent years constructing the code, years working through the logic of it, figuring out the rules, training Dexter in the rituals and disciplines of it. He put an enormous amount of himself into this project, not just time and effort, but genuine love. The specific love of a father who has decided to accept his child exactly as he is and build something around that acceptance rather than against it. The code was, in a real sense, Harry's life's work, his answer to an impossible situation. And when he saw the result, when he saw the code operating in practice in the real world on a real body with Dexter's hands and Dexter's calm and Dexter's entirely untroubled expression, he couldn't survive the contact. The Nietzschean reading of this is fairly precise. Harry created values for someone else, from outside, as an act of control and love simultaneously. This is exactly the opposite of what Nietzsche was describing when he talked about genuine value creation. Genuine value creation, in Nietzsche's framework, is done by the person for themselves, emerging from honest self-knowledge, tested against real experience, refined over time by the friction of living. It belongs to the person because it came from inside them. What Harry did was something different. He saw nature he didn't understand, he felt responsible for managing it, and he built a framework around it, the code, that would make the nature livable. But the code was never tested against Harry's own honest self-examination. It was built to contain something external to him, something he could care for without fully entering. He never had to be inside it. He could design it, teach it, supervise it, and remain himself on the other side of a wall. Until he walked into that room. When a value system is constructed to manage something rather than to understand it, it will always collapse when confronted with the thing it was designed to manage. The theory, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot survive full contact with the reality if the theory was built to hold the reality at a safe distance. Harry's theory was that Dexter's nature could be channeled into something that looked from a sufficient remove, like justice. That the kills could be clean, the targets could be deserving, the logic could hold. And in the abstract, designing it at the kitchen table with Evelyn Vogel, maybe it did hold. What Harry couldn't survive was the remove being closed, the theory collapsing into the fact of it. Dexter pleased with his hands in a body, looking up for approval. 2 words, stay away. Now, here's a detail the show returns to with deliberate purpose. Much later in the series, in Season 2, Dokes, Sergeant James Dokes, the one person at Miami Metro who has always sensed that something is deeply wrong with Dexter, after being held captive in a cabin in the Everglades and forced to watch Dexter kill, says those exact same words. Stay away. It's not an accident that the show repeats this specific phrase from 2 people who see Dexter completely in his element without the mask for the first time. 2 people who love him or have trusted him or simply worked alongside him for years. 2 people who, when the mask is gone, find that they cannot be near what's left. That pattern, the person who sees Dexter clearly and responds with the same 2 words Harry responded with, is one of the show's quieter and more honest observations. It keeps suggesting across multiple seasons that the life Dexter has built is not a life that can be fully seen without horror, and that the code, whatever Harry intended it to be, has not changed that. Harry's suicide is in the most direct sense the code passing its own verdict. The man who built the house, who designed every room of it, who taught Dexter how to live inside it, that man looked at the finished product and couldn't stay in the world with it. That is not a small thing. That is the creator of the system determining, with the most final possible act, that the system does not work the way he thought it would. Dexter, to his credit, is genuinely shattered by this revelation. The show handles it well. He doesn't just absorb it, and move on, it unsettles something in him that runs deep. The person whose approval he sought most, or the person whose moral framework he has been living by, died because of what that framework produced. That should force a reckoning. And it does, briefly. But here's what's interesting. The reckoning doesn't go where it probably should. Dexter doesn't conclude that the code is wrong, or that it needs to be replaced, or that he needs to build something different. He concludes, more or less, that Harry was too weak to bear what he'd created. There's something almost compassionate in how Dexter frames it. Harry was a good man who loved him but couldn't live with the truth of what that love required, which is a generous reading, and perhaps not an entirely wrong one. But it's also, if you look at it clearly, a way of setting aside the question that Harry's death was actually asking, which is, if the man who built this around you couldn't survive seeing it in practice, what does that tell you about the practice? The answer Dexter gives is, it tells me Harry was limited. Not, it tells me I need to think differently about what I'm doing. That response, redirecting the discomfort outward rather than inward, is something we're going to see again. And again. In fact, it's one of the most consistent patterns in the show. But before we get there, I want to linger a moment on one more dimension of Harry's death, because there's a detail that doesn't get discussed much and that I think is philosophically significant. Matthews buried the cause of death. He covered up the suicide, changed the official record, made it heart disease. He did this to protect the family, to protect Dexter and Deborah from the knowledge that their father had killed himself. And this act of protection, meant kindly, is itself an extension of the same project Harry was engaged in. The project of managing the truth about Dexter rather than confronting it. Harry managed the truth by building the code. Matthews managed it by falsifying the death record. Both acts are forms of containment, keeping the reality at a distance, making it livable, ensuring that the full weight of what has happened is not felt by the people who would have to feel it. And both acts, in their own ways, serve Dexter's continued non-reckoning. Because Dexter doesn't find out the truth about Harry until season 2. And when he does, he doesn't have the context that would make it completely unmanageable. Time has passed, the grief is old. The shock is real, but absorbed into an existing story rather than overturning it. Matthews, without meaning to, gave Dexter years of insulation from the clearest possible statement Harry could have made about the code. I cannot live with what I made. That message, delivered in full force at the time it happened, might have been the thing that actually changed something. Delivered years late, filtered through retrospect and the comfortable passage of time, it becomes a piece of Dexter's history that he can grieve and contextualize and ultimately set aside. The cover-up is one more layer of the structure that keeps Dexter exactly as he is. Not through malice, not even through weakness, through love and the desire to protect, which is almost always how these structures form, and almost always why they're so hard to dismantle. But before we get there, I want to talk about the mask itself, because the code and the dark passenger are both internal things in a sense. They're how Dexter relates to himself. The mask is something different. The mask is how he relates to the world. Dexter's double life is, in some ways, the most visible thing about the show. It's the central premise, the thing the entire narrative architecture is built around. He is a bloodspatter analyst for Miami Metro by day, which gives him access to police databases, crime scenes, and the kind of institutional cover that makes hunting killers considerably easier than it would be from the outside. And he kills by night in carefully prepared rooms wrapped in plastic sheeting with a ritual that the show documents in detail across 8 seasons. The apartment in the early series is worth mentioning. Neat, controlled, very little on the surfaces. The blood slide collection hidden in the air conditioning unit, the only real record of what he's done, his only genuine trophies, tucked away inside a machine designed to make interiors comfortable. There's a metaphor there that the show seems aware of. Dexter's real life is kept in the appliance that regulates temperature. Everything else on display is performance. Harry told a young Dexter in a flashback to lie to his psychiatrist, to think about what he was going to say and say the exact opposite of what he was thinking. That lesson, the construction of an acceptable surface over an unacceptable interior, is the foundational skill of Dexter's adult life. He has been doing it since childhood. By the time the series begins, the performance is extraordinarily good. His colleagues like him, his sister loves him, he has friends, social rituals, a recognizable public personality. He has developed, through years of careful observation, a convincing facsimile of how a person behaves. The voiceover insists that this is all it is. A facsimile, that beneath it is hollowness. The hollow place he describes in the pilot, that the emotions he performs are not real, that the connections he maintains are transactional, that he is a predator wearing the costume of a person and managing the performance with considerable skill. And yet, the show keeps undercutting its own premise. Repeatedly, across all 8 seasons and into New Blood, it shows us a Dexter who clearly feels things, who grieves, who loves, who is hurt by betrayal, who experiences something genuine in his relationships with the people closest to him. His protectiveness of Harrison is not a performance. His love for Deborah, the real, central relationship of the show, is not a performance. His grief over Rita in season 5 is not performed, which creates a genuinely interesting problem. If the emotions are real, then the hollow place framing is at least partially wrong. And if the hollow place framing is partially wrong, then who is Dexter when the mask is off? If the mask is warm, functional, emotionally present, and the face beneath is supposed to be hollow and absent, what is it when you find warm and emotionally present under the mask as well? Nietzsche wrote about masks quite a lot, actually. He thought everyone wore them, and he wasn't being censorious about it. He thought masks were a necessary feature of social life, and that some of the most interesting people wore the most interesting masks. But he had a specific observation about people who wear masks for so long that they lose track of the boundary, who have been performing for so many years in so many contexts that the performance has become genuinely ambiguous. Not fake exactly, but not quite real either. Somewhere in between. Dexter is that person. He has been performing normal human since early childhood, across decades, in every social context. And by the time the show begins, neither he nor the audience can fully locate where the performance ends. He says he feels nothing. He demonstrably feels things. He says he only uses people. He demonstrably cares about them. He says the dark passenger is the real Dexter and the normal human is the mask. But the grief and the love and the protectiveness keep pushing back against that story. This matters philosophically because you can only self-overcome. You can only do the thing Nietzsche thought was actually valuable. If you have a genuine self to start from, you need to know what you are before you can ask what you want to become. Dexter's uncertainty about his own nature, real versus performed, genuine feeling versus mimicry, means he can never quite get purchase on this question. He keeps slipping off it. Every time he seems to be getting close to an honest picture of himself, the picture shifts. The blood slides are, I think, the most honest detail in the show. They are his trophies and his record, a drop of blood from each person he's killed, kept in a glass box, hidden in the machine that keeps the temperature comfortable. They are the only thing in his life that belongs entirely to what he actually is. His genuine history, concealed from everyone, including, in some sense, himself. He never shows anyone the box. He rarely looks at it. The most truthful object in his life is the one he hides most carefully. That's the mass dynamic in its most compressed form. The real thing is in the box, invisible, temperature-controlled. Everything else is surface. There's a counterpart to the blood slides that the show introduces in season 2, and that I think is equally revealing in a different direction. James Dokes, Sergeant James Dokes at Miami Metro, a genuinely skilled detective, a former Special Forces operative, a man with his own considerable darkness and his own history with violence. From the very beginning of the show, Dokes knows something is wrong with Dexter. Not what exactly, he doesn't have the specific information. But he has the instinct, and the instinct is right, and it never leaves him. He is, across the early seasons, the least popular man in any room Dexter is also in. Dexter, for his part, finds Dokes deeply irritating, which is, of course, completely understandable when you consider that what Dokes is doing is just being perceptive. What Dokes represents in this reading is the mask not quite working. For every other person in Dexter's professional life, the performance is sufficient. They see a slightly odd, somewhat socially awkward, blood spatter analyst who is good at his job. Dokes sees something else. He can't name it, but he keeps coming back to it, keeps watching Dexter with the focused attention of someone whose survival instincts have been trained to notice exactly the gap that Dexter is maintaining. He doesn't know what the gap is, he knows it's there. The eventual arc, Dokes trapped in the cabin, understanding fully what Dexter is, saying stay away, is tragic in a specific Nietzschean sense. Dokes is one of the only characters in the show who engages with Dexter on the level of what he actually is rather than what he's performing. And the show kills him for it, indirectly but decisively. Lila West blows up the cabin, Dokes dies. And Dexter, framed as the Bay Harbor butcher, walks away. The person who saw through the mask is dead, the mask is intact, and the show moves on. I don't think this is cynicism on the show's part. I think it's honest about the way the world tends to work for people who maintain a convincing performance. The performance holds not because it's perfect, but because the people who almost see through it tend to pay more for the seeing than the performer pays for the hiding. Dokes paid with his life. Dexter paid with nothing at that point. And here's the thing about living this way for long enough. The surface starts to matter, not instead of the real thing, but alongside it. Dexter builds genuine attachments through the performance, and those attachments have real weight, and the real weight has real consequences. The surface becomes, in its own way, part of the story, and when it tears, when something breaks through, the damage is real even if the performance wasn't. Season 4 is where this gets tested most severely. And the test comes in the form of a man who had managed exactly what Dexter was trying to manage, for decades, apparently successfully, until Dexter looked closely enough to see what it had actually cost. Arthur Mitchell is, I think, the most important character in the entire Dexter franchise. Not the most likable. John Lithgow plays him with a skin-crawling specific quality that makes every scene he's in feel slightly wrong in a way you can't quite locate. Not the most memorable in terms of pure spectacle. The Ice Truck Killer has a case for that, but the most philosophically important, because Arthur Mitchell represents something Dexter genuinely needs to understand and cannot, and the failure to understand it costs him the most devastating thing the show takes from him. Let me back up. Season 4 begins with Dexter trying to balance two things: being a new father, Harrison was born at the end of season 3, and maintaining his killing in parallel with a genuine domestic life. This is the experiment. Can he be both things? Can the double life actually hold if there's a family inside it, a real family, people who love him and depend on him and will be devastated if the truth comes out? Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer, presents as proof that yes, it can. He has a wife, 2 grown children, a career as a deacon in a church, a Habitat for Humanity side activity. Decades of successful killing, never suspected, never caught. From the outside, he looks like the answer Dexter's looking for. He looks like the proof of concept. Dexter becomes fascinated. He has opportunities to kill Mitchell early in the season and doesn't take them. He delays. He needs to study this man to understand how he does it, how he maintains the family, sustains the cover, lives both lives indefinitely. He approaches Mitchell as a kind of case study in the possibility he's trying to build for himself. And here's where season 4 earns its reputation as the show's best. Because the more Dexter watches Mitchell, the more the picture changes. Mitchell's wife is not a woman who has built a happy life with a complicated man. She is a woman who has been living under a form of sustained domestic terror for years, who has learned to make herself small and quiet to avoid the specific kind of damage Mitchell inflicts on the people who live alongside him. His son is a frightened young man who can't look his father in the eye without flinching. His daughter has been planning her escape since she was old enough to understand that escape was necessary. None of this is the cover story. All of this is the actual life. The Trinity Killer with a normal family is not a man who has successfully compartmentalized. It is a man whose damage flows outward continuously, contaminating everything within range, and whose normal life is the shape of that contamination. There's a specific detail about Mitchell's killing pattern that I find particularly useful here, and it's worth dwelling on. Trinity's kills follow a precise ritual, a 3-part cycle that he has been repeating for approximately 30 years. A drowning, a fall, a bludgeoning. Each staged in a specific way, each connected to a specific trauma from his own history. The ritual never varies. He has been doing the same thing in the same order for 3 decades. This is the eternal recurrence made literal in the most harrowing possible form. Trinity has not evolved, he has not developed, he has not found new meaning or built new values or grown in any direction. He has simply repeated the same cycle with the same compulsive precision 30 years older each time, with no indication that the repetition has ever produced anything resembling satisfaction. The ritual continues because he cannot stop it, not because it is giving him what he needs. The church work is worth understanding in this light too, is not simply cover. Mitchell appears in some episodes to genuinely believe he is doing good through his church activity. The habitat for humanity, the community involvement, these are not performed. They are, in some sense, real. And this is the show being precise about something important. Mitchell has not chosen between good and evil. He has kept both simultaneously in hermetically sealed compartments that never touch. The good man who builds houses and the man who has been repeating a kill cycle for 30 years are not in conversation with each other. They coexist without friction because neither is required to account for the other. Nietzsche would recognize this as a failure of integration. The self that cannot examine itself, that cannot bring its competing drives into honest contact with each other and make a real choice about who to be, will always split. Will always be the church deacon and the murderer, the husband and the tyrant, the builder and the destroyer. Each role played sincerely in its own lane, with no self-overcoming to connect them. And the splitting over time becomes the structure. It becomes permanent. What looked like compartmentalization in year 1 has become identity by year 30. Mitchell is not compartmentalizing anymore. He is just 2 separate people in one body, neither of whom has to account for the other, both of whom are running on automation. Dexter's fascination with him is understandable on this reading. He sees in Mitchell a version of the life he's trying to build that has actually held for decades. He sees proof that it's possible. What he doesn't see, or what he can't quite let himself see, is that the holding has come at a cost that makes the held thing not worth having. Mitchell's life has held. Mitchell's life is also a horror. These 2 things are not separable. Nietzsche's observation about this kind of person, and the person who cannot self-overcome but also cannot stop, is that they don't stay static. The absence of genuine self-overcoming isn't a stable resting point, it's a slope. The person who cannot honestly examine their own nature and build genuine values around it doesn't find a comfortable equilibrium. They drift. They get worse. The things that require effort, genuine empathy, genuine patience, the genuine capacity to be present with another person without using them, these erode, not through any dramatic decision, but through consistent neglect. Every time you choose the comfortable thing over the difficult thing, you become a little more capable of only the comfortable thing. Over time, what remains is not a person. It is a set of drives wearing a person's shape. Arthur Mitchell has been doing this for decades. What remains of him when Dexter finally sees him clearly is something that looks superficially like a man. It can eat dinner and go to church and work on a habitat house, but whose relationships with every person in his life are purely extractive. His family exists to provide his cover, his church work provides his respectability, his killing provides his satisfaction. Nothing flows out from him except damage, and he has been this way for so long that he has no memory of ever being anything else. Think about that for a second. Dexter's entire fascination with Mitchell is the question, can I have the family and the kills? Can both things coexist? The answer Mitchell gives is yes, they can coexist. But what you will have, if they coexist, is not a family. You will have hostages. You will have a household full of people who have learned to manage their fear of you. That's what's waiting at the end of Dexter's road if he keeps walking it. The tragedy is that Dexter understands this and still doesn't kill Mitchell immediately. He keeps coming back. He keeps studying. And in the time he spends studying instead of acting, in the philosophical dithering, if you want to be unkind about it, Mitchell kills Rita. Season 4's finale is one of the most devastating things American television produced in the 2000s. Dexter kills Mitchell. He kills him in the Trinity Kill room with the words, "It's over." And then he goes home, relieved, thinking maybe it's actually over, thinking maybe the worst is behind him, thinking maybe. And then he finds Harrison sitting in the bathtub, in his mother's blood, with Rita dead behind him. Harrison's position in that bathtub is identical to the position Dexter was found in as a child, in the shipping container, in his mother's blood. The show is being explicit. The cycle has not been broken, it has been reproduced. The trauma that made Dexter what he is has now been visited on the child he was trying to protect. And that, the direct echo, the deliberate mirror, is the show saying as clearly as it ever says anything. The life Dexter is building does not protect the people inside it. The performance of normalcy, the code, the careful management of the double life, none of it is sufficient. Not because Dexter isn't disciplined enough, because the life itself, built the way it's built, on the foundations it's built on, inevitably leaks. Arthur Mitchell showed him exactly what was coming. Dexter looked at the mirror the show held up and couldn't quite see himself in it. The cost of that failure to see was Rita and Harrison in the tub and the beginning of the end of everything. Rita Bennett, later Rita Morgan, is one of the show's most carefully constructed characters, and I think she's somewhat underrated in how people talk about the series. She tends to get remembered primarily in relation to her death, which is understandable because her death is one of the most affecting moments in the show's run. But the relationship she and Dexter build across 4 seasons is doing more interesting work than that, and it's worth looking at it carefully. Rita is a domestic abuse survivor. Her marriage to Paul Bennett was not simply bad. It was genuinely dangerous, and it left marks. He is one of those characters the show uses sparingly and to good effect in the early seasons before the show runs out of things to do with him, and the storyline gets sorted in a way that requires you to accept that the Miami legal system works on a very specific timeline. But in the first season especially, Paul's presence does real work. She came out of it with very specific damage, a trained wariness around men who seem unpredictable, a heightened sensitivity to the kind of withdrawal and concealment that precedes violence, a hard-won set of instincts about when a situation is safe and when it isn't. And then she gets involved with Dexter, who is, by any honest measure, wildly unsafe, who conceals the entirety of his real self from her, who constructs their entire relationship on a fiction so elaborate that by the time they're married and have a child together, Rita still has no idea who she's sleeping next to. The show is careful about this. It doesn't let the relationship read as purely predatory. It keeps showing us genuine warmth between them, genuine tenderness, moments where Dexter's feeling for Rita is visible and real. She brings something out in him that the show treats as worth having. The closest thing to an honest daily life he's ever managed. The experience of being at least partly a person among persons. He is genuinely fond of her. The show doesn't let you forget that, but The relationship is built entirely on a fiction she consented to without knowing it was a fiction. Rita falls in love with the mask. She never had access to what's underneath. And her instincts, the hard-won instincts of a woman who has survived real danger and learned to read the signs of it, are being continuously misdirected by a man whose danger is nothing like what her instincts were calibrated for. There's a scene in season 2 that I've always found quietly devastating, and it doesn't get discussed much. Rita discovers that Dexter has been lying about attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings. He had told her he was a recovering addict. This was the cover story for his absences, for the controlled quality of his behavior, for the things she was noticing and needed an explanation for. She had believed it, and had been, with real care and real investment, trying to support him through recovery. When she finds out it was a lie, she is genuinely devastated. Not just because he lied, but because she had been believing in something that wasn't there. She had been in a relationship with a fiction. And this scene matters because it's a small version of the much larger truth. Every discovery Rita makes about a specific lie is a small echo of the discovery she never gets to make about the total one. Every moment where she catches Dexter being something other than what he claimed is a window into the fundamental structure of what they are. And neither she nor the show fully opens that window while she is alive. Dr. Vogel says something in season 8 that I want to reference here because it's the most honest thing the show says about Dexter's capacity for love. She asks him what he loves about Deborah and listens to his answer, and then she tells him, "None of that is about Deborah, it's about what she does for you." What he listed was not who Deborah is. It was what Deborah provides, the function Deborah serves. I think the same is true of Rita, and the show suspects it even if it can't fully commit to saying it. What Dexter loves about Rita is the experience of being in a normal life, the social cover, the warmth of being accepted by someone who believes in the version of him she can see, the feeling of being allowed inside a family. He does feel things for her, real things, not performed things, but those feelings are filtered through the performance so completely that they can't be clearly separated from it. Does he love Rita, or does he love what Rita makes possible? The show never quite answers this, which is probably honest. The truthful answer is probably both, tangled together in a way that can't be cleanly separated. But the Nietzschean point stands regardless. You cannot genuinely love someone while presenting them with a fiction of yourself. What you can do is love the experience of being accepted, which is real and which has real weight, but which is not the same thing. Rita's death closes the experiment. The question season 4 was asking, can Dexter have the family and the kills? Can the double life hold? Can the normal life and the kill room coexist without destroying each other? Gets its definitive answer in the bathtub. The answer is no. Not because Dexter wasn't careful enough or organized enough or disciplined enough. Because the life itself, constructed the way it is on the foundations it's built on, will eventually reach the people inside it. It reached Rita. Later, it will reach Deborah. I want to add one more thing about Rita before we move on because it matters to the overall accounting. There's a thread running through seasons 1 and 2 about Rita's instincts, her specific hard-won ability to read danger in men, that the show deploys with considerable care and then by necessity has to quietly set aside. Rita survived Paul Bennett. Paul was a genuinely dangerous man, abusive, volatile, the specific kind of dangerous that leaves marks not just physically but in how you read people afterwards. She came out of that marriage with finely calibrated instincts about secrecy in men, about withdrawal, about the specific texture of someone maintaining a gap between who they are and who they're presenting themselves as. These instincts are established clearly in the early seasons as reliable. She's not naive, she has been tested. And then she's with Dexter, who is maintaining a gap so enormous it barely has a name, and whose secrets run so much deeper than anything she encountered with Paul that her instincts, trained on a recognizable kind of danger, can't quite calibrate to this one. Dexter's danger doesn't feel like Paul's danger. There's no volatility, no unpredictability in the conventional sense, no sudden anger. He is calm and controlled and present in the ways that count as reassurance to someone who has survived the alternative. The NA cover story is the show's clearest acknowledgement of this mismatch. Dexter tells Rita he's a recovering addict, that the absences, the controlled behavior, the occasional strange intensity all trace back to an addiction he's managing. And Rita, who has experience of addiction in her family, believes it. More than believes it. She invests in it. She supports him through the fake recovery with genuine care and genuine investment, adjusting her own life to accommodate his supposed needs. When she finds out it was a lie, she is devastated, not just because he lied, which is bad enough, but because she had been doing the emotional labor of supporting someone through something that wasn't real. She had been in the experience of helping, and it was all built on nothing. And the specific quality of her hurt, the particular way she took it, the way it landed, is the response of someone whose instincts are telling her, "This is a pattern I recognize. This is the shape of someone I don't actually know, and I have been here before." She stays, she comes back, she marries him. And the show gives her reasons too, reasons that are real, warmth that is genuine, a version of Dexter that is, within the limits of the performance, worth staying for. But the instinct that fired when she found out about the NA lie was the right instinct, the one that recognized the gap. She overrode it with love, with hope, with the very human desire for the man she loves to be who she needs him to be. The bathtub at the end of season 4 is, among other things, the consequence of that override. But before we get to Deborah, I want to talk about Lumen and Hannah, the two relationships in the show where someone actually knew the full truth of Dexter and stayed anyway. Because what those relationships reveal is just as important as what Deborah's reveals. Deborah Morgan starts the show as a vice detective trying to make her way into homicide. She's ambitious, profane, genuinely good at her job, damaged in specific and recognizable ways, and enormously fond of her brother. The relationship between Dexter and Deborah is the central emotional relationship of the series. More central, I'd argue, than any of Dexter's romantic relationships because it runs the full length of the show and changes more completely than anything else in it. Let me sketch her arc because it's important to have it fully in mind. She becomes a homicide detective. She has a series of relationships that don't work out, several of which are connected to her being drawn to men with secrets. She's extraordinarily good at her job for several seasons. She makes lieutenant. She ends the series having shot an innocent woman to protect Dexter, unable to function as a police officer or as a person. Working a private investigator job she clearly finds meaningless, drinking heavily, cycling through self-destructive behavior, and then getting shot, and then dying in a hospital bed, and then being unplugged from life support by the brother she spent the entire show protecting. Now, the show frames this as a love story, and it is. Deborah's love for Dexter is completely real and completely documented. And the show earns the tragedy of it by making the love genuinely visible over 8 seasons. She loves him. She chose, again and again, to absorb the consequences of what he is rather than let him be caught. Every choice she made that destroyed her was made from genuine devotion. But look at the mechanism of her destruction. It is not an outside villain who undoes Deborah Morgan. It is not a bad guy who catches up with her, or a random tragedy, or the consequence of her own choices in isolation. It is sustained proximity to a person who will not be honest about who he is, cannot self-overcome, and requires the people around him to absorb the consequences of that stasis. Deborah is destroyed from the inside of her own life by love for someone whose life is structured in a way that consumes the people inside it. The specific moment, the moment the trajectory becomes irreversible, is the end of season 7. Maria Laguerta had been, for most of the season, investigating the Bay Harbor butcher case. She'd suspected Dexter. She was right. She was, by the finale, very close to being able to prove it. and Deborah, who had spent the season trying to both protect Dexter and maintain her own moral integrity. These two things turned out to be mutually exclusive. Ends up in the shipping container with Laguerta and Dexter. Laguerta has a gun. The situation resolves when Deborah shoots Laguerta. Maria Laguerta is not a bad person. She is a police lieutenant doing her job. She followed evidence, she formed a correct conclusion, she pursued it appropriately. She was doing exactly what the job asks. She gets shot in the chest by a police officer who loved her brother more than she could hold her own moral line. Deborah spent the rest of the series not recovering from this. The show documents it carefully. The drinking, the withdrawal, the inability to be in her own life the way she used to be. She killed someone who deserved to be alive. She did it to protect someone who, by any honest accounting, she should have turned in, and she could not find a way to make that bearable. Now, I want to be careful here because I think the comparison that's useful has limits. Deborah Morgan is not a passive person. She's not someone who had no agency, who was simply a victim of Dexter's proximity. She made choices, real choices, from a place of real love. She chose to protect him. She chose to know. She chose, at the crucial moment, to pull the trigger. These are her choices, and they have her weight on them. But here's the Nietzschean observation. One of the things Nietzsche wrote about with real precision is the dynamic of what happens to a person when they organize their life around someone else's stasis. When the central person in their world is someone who will not grow, will not change, will not honestly examine themselves, and who requires the people around them to adapt continuously to the consequences of that refusal. The person who does that adapting, who absorbs, who compensates, who keeps making the situation workable by taking its costs onto themselves, that person will eventually be hollowed out by the process, not dramatically, not all at once. Gradually, in the way that things erode under sustained pressure. Deborah's arc is that erosion. Season by season, something gets taken from her, not by a villain, not by bad luck. By the slow, grinding process of loving someone who can't be honest and absorbing what that requires. She starts the show with genuine ambition, genuine forward momentum, a real sense of herself and where she's going. By season 7, she has lost most of that. By season 8, she has lost all of it. The show wants us to find this tragic, and it is tragic, but it is not quite the tragedy the show presents. The show presents it as the tragedy of love, the price of loving someone unconditionally, the cost of true devotion. And there is that in it. But underneath the love story, there's something colder. A man who could not be honest about who he was, and a woman who paid the price of that dishonesty across 8 years of her life. Dr. Vogel, again in season 8, puts it precisely when she says that Dexter's notion of love is about what people do for him, not who they are. And that's true. Dexter loves what Deborah provides, the acceptance, the presence, the unconditional backing. Whether he loves who Deborah is independently of what she does for him is a harder question. One the show doesn't quite ask directly. It's worth thinking for a moment about what Deborah's career looked like before the knowledge of Dexter's secret destroyed it. Because the career matters. It is, in the early seasons, genuinely impressive. She is a skilled detective with real instincts, real drive, and an unusual willingness to push back against institutional resistance. Her path from vice to homicide to lieutenant, in a department run mostly by men who find her difficult, is earned through genuine ability. She is not trading on anyone. She is building something. And what happens to that career across the middle seasons of the show is not a consequence of her own limitations. It is not her ambition outrunning her ability or her personality causing problems she can't manage. It is the slow, direct consequence of what she learns in season 6, and what she does with that knowledge across seasons 7 and 8. She compromises herself to protect Dexter, she looks the other way, she participates, she shoots Laguerta. And each of those acts takes something from the career, some capacity for the clean forward momentum she had in the early seasons. until by season 8 the career is basically over, not because she's been fired, but because the person who could do it, the Deborah Morgan who was building something real, has been ground down to a point where she can't access that version of herself anymore. Quinn is worth a brief mention as a contrast because the show puts him alongside Deborah for most of the run, and the comparison is quietly illuminating. Quinn is not a great detective. He is, by the department's own informal assessment, irresponsible and somewhat unreliable. He gets by largely on charm and decent instincts. He is not building anything. He is maintaining, week to week, a functional life without much direction. But Quinn makes it through. He ends the original series still employed, still more or less intact, still Quinn, because Quinn never loved anything enough to let it destroy him. His lack of genuine investment in anyone or anything protected him from the specific kind of damage that genuine investment in Dexter caused. This is not a recommendation for Quinn's way of being. It's simply the observation that the people in the show who come through relatively undamaged are the ones who never fully committed to anyone around them. The people who did commit, Rita, Deborah, even Harry, paid for it completely. The last time we see Deborah alive, Dexter is holding her hand in the hospital, a stroke following a gunshot wound. Her brain activity is minimal. Dexter disconnects the life support and takes her out to sea. He buries her the way he buries his kills, in the deep water from his boat alone. It's a beautiful, devastating scene. And it's also, if you look at it without the weight of the music and the performance, the clearest possible statement of the show's honest accounting. Deborah Morgan, who loved Dexter Morgan more than she could afford to, died and was buried with the same ritual he used for the people he killed. In the end, the two categories of person in Dexter's life, the people he loves and the people he disposes of, receive the same treatment, not because he intended it that way, because his life was built in a way that made it inevitable. There are two relationships in the show's later seasons that I think of as deliberate experiments. The show itself testing the question of what happens when someone knows the full truth of Dexter and chooses to be near him anyway. Both experiments are interesting. Both, for different reasons, don't go where you might expect. Lumen Pierce enters the story in season 5. Jordan Chase and his associates had kidnapped, assaulted, and killed a number of women over several years. Lumen was one of the kidnapped women who survived. She encounters Dexter because he, for reasons of his own, got involved in the case. She discovers what he is, not through inference or suspicion, but directly by seeing it. And her response is not to run. Her response is that she wants what he can provide: access to the men who did this to her and the skills to reach them. Season 5 is sometimes overlooked in discussions of the show. It comes after the devastating season before it, and it can't match that for pure emotional impact. But I've always thought it's quietly one of the show's most interesting seasons, precisely because of what it shows in the Dexter-Lumen dynamic. For the first time in the series, Dexter is in a relationship with someone who sees the kill room, understands what happens in it, and chooses to be there. There is no performance. There is no mask. He doesn't need to maintain the fiction because the fiction has been dropped. And what happens is interesting. Something genuine emerges, not romantic exactly, or not only, it's more tender than that and more honest. There's a real affinity between them. And the show handles it with some delicacy. They work together with a shared purpose and shared knowledge and a kind of ease that Dexter almost never has with anyone. He doesn't have to manage the distance between who he is and who he's pretending to be. There is no distance. She knows what she's next to. The season ends, as these things tend to in Dexter, with Deborah almost catching them. She sees two figures in the kill room but doesn't see their faces. She makes a choice, one of the show's quietly significant moments, to let them go. She says later that she understood what they were doing even without knowing who they were, and that she let them go because she thought justice meant something even outside the law. This is, of course, setting up the reckoning that will come 2 seasons later when she learns one of those figures was her brother. Lumen leaves at the end of season 5. When the revenge is complete and the men are dead, she tells Dexter that she doesn't feel the darkness anymore. Whatever it was that had been driving her, the specific, urgent, consuming need for this, it's gone. The killing, for her, was always circumstantial. It was a response to a specific harm, and when the harm was addressed, the response resolved. Her dark passenger, such as it was real but finite. She thanks Dexter, she leaves, and Dexter is alone again. There's something worth noticing here that the show underplays. Lumen healed. She had a dark passenger that was born from trauma and resolved when the trauma was addressed. This is actually the more common human experience, dark urges that emerge from specific circumstances and recede when those circumstances change. Dexter watches this happen and seems to feel something wistful about it. Maybe envious, maybe simply aware that his version is different. Hannah McKay appears in season 7, and she's a different proposition entirely. She doesn't have a trauma-based darkness. She has something more fundamental. An ease with death and a willingness to use it that isn't reactive or circumstantial. She's a poisoner. She is, in the show's universe, something like a peer. Their relationship is explicitly constructed on mutual recognition. She sees him and he sees her, not the cover story, not the performance, but the actual thing underneath. And this mutual visibility is treated by the show as the basis for something more genuine than what Dexter has with anyone else. For the first and really only time in the series, both people in the relationship are fully disclosed. The mask is off on both sides. And it works in the way the show shows it. There's a real chemistry, a real ease, a quality of being genuinely met by the other person that Dexter has never quite had. The season-long arc keeps being disrupted by external forces. The Koshka Brotherhood, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, Deborah's spiral. But the relationship itself holds. By season 8, Hannah is back in the picture and they're planning to leave for Argentina. Escape, start over. Harrison, Hannah, Dexter, somewhere far enough away that the weight of everything can't reach them. It doesn't happen. It never happens. The brain surgeon kills Deborah. Dexter fakes his own death and vanishes into the woods of Oregon. The Argentina plan dissolves, and here's the Nietzschean observation I want to end on. With both of these relationships, both of them show that Dexter can be genuinely known, that there is something genuine underneath the performance, something worth knowing, something that can form real connections when the conditions allow it. Both of them suggest that the life Dexter is building doesn't have to be built the way it's being built, but both of them also show that genuine connection for Dexter is only sustainable in crisis. Lumen's intimacy with him requires shared purpose and ongoing danger. Hannah's intimacy requires the shared transgression of mutual secret-keeping. The moment circumstances approach something like ordinary, the moment they get to just being two people in a life together without the immediate pressure of pursuit or revenge or investigation, Dexter can't maintain the realness. The performance reasserts itself. The mask comes back. You cannot build a life with someone when you're not sure who you are outside of the particular circumstances that revealed you to each other. Dexter knows who he is in the kill room. He doesn't quite know who he is in Argentina. And that uncertainty, the same uncertainty that runs through all of this, from the hollow place in the pilot to the exile in New Blood, is the thing that keeps him from having the life he claims to want. Since we've been talking about Lumen, I want to sit with her departure for a moment, because I think there's an implication the show floats and then leaves unexamined that's worth pulling out. When Lumen tells Dexter that the darkness is gone, that she no longer feels the urge that had been driving her, his response is interesting. He seems to believe her, and he seems to feel something wistful or resigned about it, as if her departure confirms something he had suspected. And what he seems to be confirming is her version was always going to be temporary because her version was circumstantial. His version is different. His is permanent. His is fundamental. And maybe he's right. The show never really challenges this belief, and it seems to endorse it. 8 seasons of the urge returning, of the passenger reasserting itself, suggests that whatever Dexter has is not the circumstantial kind. It's structural. But here's what I find interesting about that framing. If Dexter is right, if his darkness is genuinely, fundamentally, irrevocably his, then the dark passenger framing is even more dishonest than it first appears. Because the dark passenger implies something that arrived from outside, something that hitched a ride, something that could in theory unhitch and depart. Lumen's departure confirms that this is possible. For her, the passenger was always a hitchhiker. For Dexter, it's the driver, always has been. And if it's always been the driver, if the darkness is not a passenger but the fundamental thing, the core, the origin rather than the addition, then the name dark passenger is not just an alibi. It's a specific kind of lie. It claims a relationship with his own nature, arm's length, managed, passenger to driver, that has never been accurate. He is not managing the passenger. He is the passenger, calling itself managed. Nietzsche would find this precise. The person who invents a story about their own nature in order to have a more comfortable relationship with it is not moving towards self-overcoming. They are moving away from it with considerable sophistication. The story is good enough to work. It holds up under examination mostly. It has been held up for decades. But it is still a story, and the person who needs a story about who they are to make who they are bearable has not yet done the hard thing. Hannah, by contrast, doesn't use a story. She is what she is, matter-of-factly. She doesn't have a passenger. She has a capacity, and she uses it, and she doesn't dress it up. This is, in some ways, closer to the honest relationship with one's nature that Nietzsche was pointing toward. Whether it constitutes genuine self-overcoming is a separate question. She hasn't obviously built something new from honest self-examination. She simply dispensed with the cover story. But the dispensing with the cover story is at least a real step. Dexter, watching her, seems to feel the difference. He can't quite name it. But the ease between them, the specific quality of being with someone who doesn't need the story, is its own form of recognition. But it's one more form of the same central failure. He is moving in circles, season after season, the same shape of life, the same fundamental stasis, new wrapping. Which brings me to something Nietzsche wrote about that I find genuinely useful here. A thought experiment he considered the most honest test of whether a person is actually living their life or just moving through it. Nietzsche came up with a thought experiment that he considered the heaviest possible thought. He described it this way. Imagine a demon comes to you in your quietest moment, when you're alone, when there's nothing around you to distract you from your own life, when the entertainment has gone quiet and the routines have paused, and there's just you and the fact of your existence. And the demon makes an announcement. The announcement is this: the life you're currently living, that this exact life, every moment of it, every choice and every consequence, and every morning and every night, is going to repeat, not once, not twice, an infinite number of times, exactly as it has been. Every conversation you've had, every loss you've sustained, every relationship you've built and broken and built again, every hour spent doing what you do. All of it, again and again and again, forever, with no possibility of change. Nietzsche's question was, what is your reaction? He was not making a scientific claim. He was not saying this is actually how the universe works. He was using the hypothetical as a diagnostic, because the reaction a person has to that thought reveals something fundamental about how they're relating to their own life. If the thought fills you with horror, if the prospect of this exact life on infinite repeat feels like a punishment, then the life you are living is not the life you would choose if you were choosing freely. You're in it by default, by drift, by the accumulated momentum of not having chosen something different. And somewhere in you, something knows this. If the thought produces something close to peace, or even in the most ambitious version of Nietzsche's vision, genuine enthusiasm, then you are living in a way that is genuinely yours. You have made choices with enough honesty and enough genuine will that you can look back at them and say, that was mine. I did that. I would do it again. He called the full version of this amor fati, love of fate, and he thought it was the highest possible expression of how a person can relate to their own existence. Not acceptance, not tolerance, love, the complete ownership of everything you are and everything you've done. Now apply this to Dexter Morgan, and what's useful here, what makes Dexter such a clean case, is that the show has essentially run the experiment for him, because the structure of Dexter's life already is the eternal recurrence. He is already living it. Think about the shape of the show season by season. Season 1, Dexter investigates a serial killer while managing his secret. A major relationship is disrupted. The season ends, the situation resolves, Dexter resets. Season 2, Dexter is threatened with exposure while his personal life is complicated by a new relationship. A major relationship is disrupted. The season ends, the situation resolves, Dexter resets. Season 3, a new friendship, a new threat, a major relationship, disrupted, reset. Season 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. New villain, new complication, new person either damaged or dead, reset. The external details change. The internal architecture doesn't. Dexter wakes up the same man at the end of every season that he was at the beginning. Yet the kills happen. People around him are damaged by proximity to what he is. He grieves or performs grieving or does something that sits uncomfortably between the two. And then the next season begins and he is recognizably, structurally, fundamentally the same person. This is not just a feature of the format. The way long-running shows need to maintain a consistent central character so the format can repeat. The show's own writers have described this pattern in interviews as something they were aware of and struggled with. Dexter doesn't change. They tried to give him growth, and the growth wouldn't stick. There's something in the character as constructed, the code, the dark passenger, the fundamental architecture of how he relates to his own nature, that resists genuine forward movement. And that resistance is exactly what the eternal recurrence test exposes. If Dexter were genuinely at peace with his life, if he were living in the amor fati way Nietzsche meant, there would be no show. The show exists because Dexter is dissatisfied. Every season is driven by his wanting something different from what he has. The normal life, the genuine relationship, the place where Harrison can grow up safely, the world where the double life isn't double anymore. He is always reaching for something outside the current arrangement, which means the current arrangement is not the one he would choose if he were choosing freely. The itch is the tell. The constant low-level dissatisfaction, the ongoing project of trying to be something he isn't quite managing to be, the relationships that keep almost working and then not, all of this is the sign of a person who has arranged themselves a comfortable existence and has almost no contentment inside it. Comfort and contentment are not the same thing. Comfort is what you get when you successfully arrange your circumstances to avoid what disturbs you. Contentment is what you feel when you've been genuinely present inside a life that is actually yours. Comfort is arranged. Contentment is earned. Dexter has the comfort down. The ritual, the apartment, the code, the methodical preparation of the kill room. He is very comfortable in his routines. What he doesn't have, what the show keeps gesturing toward and never quite delivering, is contentment. The feeling of being genuinely inside the right life, making the right choices, building something that is recognizably and authentically his. I've always thought the single most honest line in the show is from that same season 7 monologue we talked about earlier. If there's no dark passenger, then I'm responsible for everything I've done. That's the line a person who has done the eternal recurrence test says when they realize, mid-test, that they would not choose this life in the version where they own it completely. The dark passenger is the mechanism that makes the life bearable by distributing the authorship. Without it, the full weight of the infinite repetition lands on one person, Dexter. Every choice, every kill, every person damaged, his forever on repeat. He can't carry that. Not because it's objectively too heavy. People carry extraordinary things when they've chosen them honestly. But because he hasn't chosen this honestly, he has drifted into it, been shaped into it by Harry's code and childhood trauma, and the accumulated momentum of having always been this way. The life is not a choice, it's a given. And you can't love what you haven't chosen. What would it look like if he could? I'm not entirely sure the show knows. But it would start with the dark passenger's abolition, with Dexter saying, simply and completely, "This is me, all of it, and I am responsible for all of it." And then from that place of full ownership, asking what he actually wants to build. The show gives us one more chance to see whether he can get there. In New Blood, which is not set in Miami, which is Dexter after 8 seasons of reset, living under a different name in the woods of upstate New York with his killing apparently suppressed. This is the eternal recurrence interrupted, or so it seems. A different life, a new chapter, finally. Let me pause on what the original Season 8 finale actually does with this question, because it is one of the more revealing creative choices the show ever made. Dexter drives his boat into a hurricane and disappears. The world thinks he is dead. He emerges alive in rural Oregon, working as a lumberjack. End of show. He has escaped the cycle by faking his way out of it. He has not faced anything, not owned anything, not built anything different. He has simply relocated. The eternal recurrence in this reading doesn't end. He just changes the scenery and hopes the passenger won't know his new address. The fact that New Blood begins with the passenger having woken up the moment circumstances became interesting again is, among other things, the show admitting what the original ending was trying to avoid admitting. You cannot escape the eternal recurrence by moving. You can only escape it by becoming different. And becoming different requires the exact work Dexter has spent 8 seasons finding reasons not to do. But then Harrison arrives, and the reset begins again. New Blood is set roughly a decade after the original series finale. Dexter's living as Jim Lindsay in Iron Lake, New York, a small town, snow, a sporting goods shop, a relationship with the local police chief. He has, by every external measure, become the thing he always said he wanted to be. The normal life. The man without the dark passenger, or with the passenger so thoroughly suppressed that it amounts to the same thing. He hunts deer, he seems comfortable, he has friends in the community, he has not killed anyone in a very long time. And then Harrison arrives. Harrison Morgan, now a teenager, played by Jack Alcott with a kind of raw, unguarded quality that the show needed, has spent years in foster care and unstable circumstances, bouncing around after Hannah's death, trying to find the father who faked his death and vanished. He tracked Dexter down. He came to find him. Harrison has his father's nature. The show establishes this carefully and without melodrama. He cuts himself. He is drawn to violence in ways he can't explain and can't control. He has the same fundamental thing Dexter has, in the same undeveloped, uncoded, unstructured form that Dexter had before Harry gave him a framework. He is Dexter at the beginning of the story, before the code. And what Dexter does when he recognizes this is, I think, the most telling thing in the entire New Blood season. He starts teaching Harrison the code. He takes him out, teaches him the rituals, explains the rules, begins the process of constructing a framework around what Harrison is. He is becoming Harry. This is not subtle. The show is being completely explicit about it. The cycle is reproducing itself. The code was Harry's attempt to manage what Dexter was, and it failed. Not completely, not immediately, but structurally over time, in the way we've been tracing throughout this video. And now Dexter is beginning the same project on his son. He is handing down the borrowed values. He is constructing the framework from outside. He is becoming, to Harrison, what Harry was to him. Someone who loved him and couldn't be honest with him. Building a structure around a nature he partially understood and couldn't fully face. The season is, in this reading, not just a sequel. It's a demonstration of the eternal recurrence at the generational level. The cycle doesn't just repeat within a single life, it passes down. Now, the finale. Dexter kills Logan, an Iron Lake police officer, a young man doing his job, entirely innocent of anything, in order to escape from the cell he's been put in. He breaks Logan's neck with his hands through the cell bars. Logan is not a killer. Logan is not on the code. Logan is just in the way. And Dexter kills him the way he would kill anyone who is threatening his freedom, efficiently and without apparent anguish. Harrison finds out. He is furious, not in a teenage abstract way, but in the way of someone who has just discovered that the single thing they believed about their father, the thing that made the father's violence bearable to them, was not true. The code said only killers. Logan was not a killer. The code was a lie, or at least it was conditional, and the condition was Dexter's convenience. Harrison demands that Dexter turn himself in. Dexter refuses. He tells Harrison that he doesn't have to come with him, but he can't stay. And then he starts to walk away. He starts to walk away from his son again, the same abandonment that had already defined Harrison's childhood. Dexter vanishing, faking his death, leaving, repeating itself in real time in the snow in front of the boy who had spent years trying to find him. Harrison picks up the rifle. He loads around. He calls after his father, and the scene that follows is one of the show's genuinely great ones. He asks Dexter whether his mother and Deborah would be alive if it weren't for him. The flashbacks come. Logan, Lagerda, Dokes, Lundy, Harry, Rita, Deborah. All the people whose deaths trace back one way or another to Dexter Morgan. Dexter apologizes. He says Harrison deserves a better life and a better father. And then, and this is the critical moment, he tells Harrison to take the safety off. He tells him it's the only way out. He instructs his son to shoot him in the heart. Harrison pulls the trigger. Dexter falls. With his last breath, he tells his son, "You did good." Now, on the surface, this looks like the culmination of the entire arc. Dexter accepting the full consequence of what he is. Choosing to end the cycle rather than continue it. Looking at the sum of everything he has done, the list of names in the flashback, and deciding that the most honest and most complete thing he can do is let it end. It looks like Amor Fati. It looks like the moment he finally owns all of it and says, "This is what this life costs, and I will not ask the people I love to keep paying it." But look at the mechanism. He doesn't end his own life. He asks Harrison to do it. He instructs his son, a traumatized teenager who came to find his father and has just discovered that his father is something much darker than he knew, to perform the most difficult possible act. He puts the gun in Harrison's hands and gives him the instructions. And then he dies receiving, not doing. He is passive even in his own death. The hardest action, the one that would constitute genuine self-overcoming, genuine ownership of everything he is, belongs to someone else, a 17-year-old, his child. There's something genuinely Nietzschean about this, but it's Nietzsche in the ironic mode. The moment that looks most like the Ubermensch completing his arc, looking at himself with full clarity and choosing the ending his life required, is actually the moment that most clearly shows he still can't do the hard thing himself. He needs someone to do it for him. Even the final self-overcoming is outsourced. And then, of course, resurrection reveals that he survived. He was resuscitated in an emergency room. The gunshot wound that was supposed to end the cycle didn't. Dexter's alive. He's in New York. He's following Harrison. I cannot think of a more literal metaphor for what we've been talking about. The man who cannot self-overcome cannot stay dead. The cycle, having apparently ended, begins again. Resurrection, Season 2 ordered. 3 seasons planned with possibility for more. Whatever the show intends by bringing him back, I have genuine curiosity about where the resurrection arc goes. The narrative choice to revive him is, in its own way, the clearest statement the franchise has made about what Dexter Morgan actually is. He is the recurring pattern. He is the loop that cannot close. He is, in the most precise sense, the person for whom the eternal recurrence is not a philosophical thought experiment, but a literal, structural fact of existence. He keeps going. The cycle keeps going. And we, the audience, the people who watched and brought him back twice and turned New Blood into a record-breaking return, we are the reason it keeps going. And that, I think, is where it becomes useful to talk about us for a moment. Not just Dexter. Let me tell you a story about the audience, because I think it's the most important part of what Nietzsche was actually warning about. And it's the part that implicates all of us rather than just Dexter. The show premiered in October 2006. Showtime had taken a risk on it. A prestige cable drama about a serial killer you were supposed to like. Adapted from Jeff Lindsay's novels, starring Michael C. Hall, fresh from 6 Feet Under. The first 2 seasons were critically praised and developed a devoted following. The show was doing something unusual and doing it well. Then Fox canceled it, twice. Once in 2000 and once in 2002 before the current Showtime version, for the record. I mean the original Fox version, which never got produced. But even in its Showtime incarnation, there were periods where the show's future felt uncertain. Season 8 was the show at its commercial peak in terms of viewership. The series finale drew over 3 million total viewers on premiere night, which was, at that moment, the largest audience in Showtime's history. And then New Blood, released in 2021, nearly a decade after the original ended. The limited series averaged around 8 million viewers per week across all platforms, 8 million. For a Showtime streaming show more than a decade into the life of the franchise, New Blood became the most watched series in Showtime's history. We did not lose interest. We did not move on. We brought him back, watched him in extraordinary numbers, got him a prequel and a sequel and a sequel to the sequel. Michael C. Hall's face and voice and specific brand of controlled menace have been part of the cultural furniture for approaching 2 decades. Why? The easy answer is that the show is genuinely good. Seasons 1, 2, and 4, especially, are genuinely excellent television. Michael C. Hall's performance across the run is remarkable. He makes the internal life of a character who claims to have no internal life completely compelling, and that's a technically demanding thing to do. The premise is novel. The execution is often superb. These things are all true, and they explain some of the audience. But not 8 million viewers on a Showtime streaming service in 2021. Not the cultural staying power, not the bring him back from dead twice over enthusiasm. That requires something more than the show is good. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra about a scene where his philosopher protagonist Zarathustra comes down from a mountain to share his ideas about what human beings could become. The crowd doesn't want to hear it, so Zarathustra tries a different approach. He describes the last man, the comfortable, directionless, small pleasures person who has decided contentment is the highest goal and found a decent approximation of it. He describes this to the crowd expecting horror, expecting the description to work as a warning, as a portrait of what they should not want to be. The crowd cheers. They say, "Give us this. Make us into this. We want the last man." Zarathustra is devastated. He had come with something real to offer. The crowd heard it and chose the comfortable thing. Now, I'm not saying Dexter's audience is the last man crowd in some direct or contemptuous sense. I don't think Nietzsche was contemptuous of the crowd, actually. He was sad about them and somewhat in awe of how consistently they made the same choice, but not contemptuous. The choice for comfort over difficulty is understandable. It is, in most ordinary circumstances, the rational choice. The difficult thing is hard and might not work. The comfortable thing is comfortable and is right there. What I'm saying is this: Dexter offers something the crowd keeps choosing. He offers the fantasy of the Ubermensch, the aesthetics and the feeling of genuine freedom from conventional morality, without the actual cost of it. He operates beyond conventional morality. He has his own code. He acts on his nature. He is self-aware, composed, in control. He is what genuine freedom from inherited values looks like if you don't look too carefully at the foundations. Watching him, we get to inhabit that fantasy. We get to cheer for someone who moves through the world without the weight of the rules everyone else is carrying. And the show is careful to provide just enough scaffolding. He only kills killers, he loves his sister, he wants to be normal, he's trying to do right by his son, to make the fantasy consumable. Just enough moral structure to let us feel okay about the vicarious transgression. The things we had to look past to enjoy this are significant if you inventory them. Rita, Deborah, Dokes, who died in a swamp framed for things Dexter did. La Guerta, who was right. Logan. The list of people whose lives are shorter or more damaged because of proximity to this man is long and documented. The show keeps track. It just also keeps the music going. And the music going, the voiceover running, the performance intact, these are the show's equivalent of the code. They provide the alibi. They distribute the authorship of what we're watching such that the enjoyment doesn't have to be fully owned. We're not rooting for a serial killer. We're rooting for a man with a code who only kills bad people and is trying his best. The dark passenger is not his fault. The things that go wrong are mostly the result of his victims being too close to his family. The framing takes the weight of the choice off. Here's the thing, though. Taking the weight of the choice off is exactly what Nietzsche thought was the fundamental spiritual problem of modern life. The gradual structural removal of full ownership from our choices and our values and our ways of being. The arrangement of existence such that nothing has to be fully faced, fully owned, fully chosen. The code does this for Dexter. The dark passenger does this for Dexter. And the show's framing and music and Michael C. Hall's extraordinary performance does this for us. We watch Dexter and feel the fantasy of genuine freedom. We see someone who has apparently done the hard thing, examined themselves, built something authentic, operates with real self-possession and real internal coherence. And we feel vicariously what that would be like. It feels like a relief. The reason it feels like a relief is worth sitting with. It feels like a relief because most of us have not done the hard thing. Most of us are carrying inherited values we haven't examined, performing identities we haven't chosen, living in the gap between who we actually are and who we've decided it's acceptable to appear to be. That gap is uncomfortable and it's constant and it requires management. Watching someone who doesn't appear to have the gap, who appears to be exactly what they are all the way through without apology, is genuinely restful. Even if that appearance is, as we've been arguing tonight, largely a fiction. And I want to be precise about what kind of fiction it is, because I think there's a specific misidentification happening in the audience's response to Dexter that Nietzsche would have found both inevitable and worth naming. The Nietzschean critique of modern moral life is that most people are trapped inside values they didn't choose, expressing identities they didn't construct, maintaining a performance of normalcy that costs them considerable effort and produces very little genuine satisfaction. This is, for a lot of people, a lot of the time, more or less accurate. The weight of it is real. The desire to be free of it is real. And when a piece of art appears that seems to show someone who has genuinely escaped that weight, who moves through the world unencumbered, who doesn't apologize, who has looked at himself honestly and made his choices from a place of real self-knowledge, the audience response is not irrational. It's the response to being shown something that looks like the solution to a real problem. The problem is that Dexter isn't the solution. He is a very convincing portrait of the solution. He has the aesthetics of genuine freedom, the calm, the self-possession, the code, without the substance. He has the performance of self-overcoming without the overcoming itself. And the show, through Michael C. Hall's remarkable work and the accumulated intimacy of 8 seasons, gives you enough access to the interior life to feel like you're seeing something real. You feel like you know him. You feel like what you're seeing is genuine. But what you're seeing, as we've traced through the whole arc, is a man who lives by borrowed values, externalizes his darkest drives onto a fictional entity, repeats the same cycle season after season, and leaves everyone who loves him damaged or dead. The misidentification, the substitution of the performance for the thing itself, is exactly the trap Nietzsche thought modern people were most vulnerable to. The inability to tell the genuine article from a convincing facsimile, the willingness to accept the aesthetics of freedom in place of freedom itself. And I think that's the final piece of what Nietzsche was actually warning about. Not that a monster would appear, not that transgression would be celebrated, but that the fantasy of genuine freedom from conventional morality, the fantasy of the Ubermensch, would be sold back to us as entertainment in a form just convincing enough to feel real, without requiring us to do any of the actual work that genuine freedom requires. That we would consume the aesthetics of self-overcoming without the overcoming. That we would watch the performance and call it the thing. We made Dexter a star. We got the prequel and the sequel and the sequel to the sequel. And what we loved about him, the specific quality we kept returning for, was the fantasy of a life lived beyond the rules. A man who knew what he was and built something around it and didn't apologize for it. The uncomfortable Nietzschean observation is that the thing we loved wasn't quite real. The code was Harry's. The dark passenger was an alibi. The self-knowledge was genuine in some places and carefully avoided in others. The man we were watching wasn't beyond conventional morality. He was inside a different set of inherited constraints, wearing the costume of freedom, and declining season after season to look at himself closely enough to notice. And we loved him anyway. We brought him back. We watched in extraordinary numbers. Zarathustra's crowd made their choice. We made ours. And yet, for all of that, for all the philosophical reservations and the honest accounting and the things the show did that it perhaps shouldn't have, I want to end by saying clearly that Dexter is a genuinely great piece of television at its best. The caveat deserves saying aloud because everything I've argued tonight only works in the context of a show that was good enough to be worth arguing about. Seasons 1, 2, and 4 especially. Season 1 does the foundational work with real skill. It takes a premise that sounds like a pitch for a notoriously bad idea and makes it work. And the reason it works is that the writers were, in those early years, honest about the costs. They let the tension be real. They let the people around Dexter be people, not props for his story. The Ice Truck Killer arc is genuinely elegant. Dexter investigating a serial killer who turns out to be his biological brother, a man who was in the same shipping container as him as a child, and came out different because he had a different person waiting on the other side of it. The question the arc is really asking is, what made Dexter Dexter? Was it nature? Was it Harry? Is the code the difference between him and Brian Moser, or is it just the costume? Season 4 is, I think, the show at its absolute peak. What Lithgow does with Arthur Mitchell, the way he plays the surface-level decency and the rot underneath simultaneously, so that scenes with him are genuinely uncomfortable even when nothing overtly frightening is happening, is extraordinary. And the finale's last shot, which we've talked about, deserves its reputation. That shot was earned. The show loses its way, I think, when it stops being honest about the costs. Season 6 is largely disconnected from anything that feels like genuine consequence. Season 8 has the most interesting philosophical premise of any season. Dr. Vogel arriving and reframing Dexter's entire origin story, the code revealed as even more externally constructed than we knew, and then doesn't quite follow it where it could go. The Hannah storyline in Season 8 is appealing, but it's largely pulling against the weight of what else is happening. And the original series finale, well, there are whole videos to be made about the original series finale. It is not the ending the show earned. Dexter driving his boat into a hurricane and emerging as a lumberjack in Oregon is not the ending the show earned. It is the ending of a show that ran out of honest conclusions and chose the convenient one, which is, of course, consistent with everything we've been discussing. New Blood, for all its flaws, gets closer to what the show always needed. The scene in the snow is genuine. The look on Harrison's face is genuine. The list of names in the flashback, Logan, Lagerda, Dokes, Lundy, Harry, Rita, Deborah, is an honest accounting. The show, for one season at the end, looked at what it had been doing and showed you the bill. That took some courage. Whether Resurrection does something genuinely new with what New Blood set up, I'm curious. Harrison's arc is the most interesting space the franchise has, I think. He is Dexter without the code. He is the nature without the framework, the damage without the management, the thing itself before it was given a costume. What he does with that, who he becomes, whether he finds something that's genuinely his rather than inherited, that's the question I'm most interested in. And what makes Harrison genuinely different from Dexter, philosophically, is that he has no Harry. There is no authority figure standing behind him with a set of rules to manage what he is. The code, for better and worse, gave Dexter a structure. It was borrowed and externally imposed and ultimately insufficient, but it gave him something to orient around. Harrison has to build something from scratch, in real time, as an adult, without the years of careful childhood construction that shaped Dexter's self-understanding. Whatever Harrison becomes, he will have made himself, for good or ill, without the scaffolding that Dexter leaned on so heavily. That's terrifying, actually. It's also the most genuinely Nietzschean starting position the franchise has ever put a character in. A person at the beginning, before the borrowed values arrive, facing their own nature with nothing but their own judgment. I have genuine hopes for what the show does with that. I'll probably make a video about Resurrection when there's enough of it to work with. For now, wherever you are tonight, settled in or drifting or somewhere in between, I hope this has been a comfortable couple of hours. These ideas are old ones. Nietzsche wrote about the last man and the Ubermensch in the 1880s, and both of those figures are as recognizable now as they were then, which is either reassuring or unsettling depending on how you look at it. Dexter Morgan is not Nietzsche's last man. Not exactly, not in the same way Peter Griffin might be argued to be. He is something more complicated and in some ways more interesting. He is the person who looks like the Ubermensch from the outside and isn't quite from the inside, who has the aesthetics of genuine freedom and the structure of inherited constraint, who claims to know himself completely and keeps finding, season after season, that there are rooms in the house he hasn't visited. That's a very human thing, actually, the gap between the self we present and the self we are. The distance between the values we claim and the values we actually live by. The slow, persistent way that the things we don't examine tend to make the important decisions while we're looking elsewhere. We recognized him. That's why we kept watching. Not because we are what he is, but because we understood the gap. We know what it feels like to have an official story about yourself and a different real one. We know what it costs to maintain that distance. We know, if we're honest, something about the comfort of the dark passenger. Whatever form our version takes, the thing we blame instead of owning, the inherited framework we live by instead of the examined one we built ourselves. Dexter is Nietzsche's warning made watchable, made lovable, made into a star, and the dark passenger can rest. Good night.